Maps, a visual representation of an area, and a very common tool used in a social studies classroom. Today, let's bridge some old ideas and new ideas and see if we could bring some excitement back for students so that they could enjoy maps while learning history. One map we're going to look at, this map here, Pictorial New York, is a map that was actually created in 1855. If you take a look at this map, it is chock filled with information. We could see right away that it demonstrates and shows us 62 counties across New York, all color-coded with our boundaries. But the information around the map is a great source to understand what life was like in 1855. If we peruse around, we can actually see that we have two cities highlighted on the bottom. One city is Buffalo, and the other is New York City. That says a lot about the size of the city at that time, such as Buffalo was a growing city in 1855. If we move up, it actually tells us qualification restrictions for voters. You had to be a white male to be able to vote in New York State in 1855. It also shows us religious denominations. We move around and it gives us census information along this side. And a really interesting point, it tells us that there were over 4,000 miles of mail routes in New York in 1855. As you can tell, this is just filled with great historical information. Let's now take a look at a map on the smartboard. This map is of the Erie Canal. Now here we can see change over time. If you take a look, we have a red line demonstrating the first Erie Canal that was created in 1825. Above that, we see the dotted line, which is the enlarged barge canal. That was actually built in 1918. We could follow along. We see that there are some drastic changes from the original canal to the barge canal. The barge canal actually widened areas and went much deeper so that larger barge boats could travel and much larger loads could be passed along the Erie Canal. Now, this is a great example of alteration due to human development. Let's take a look at using this map and adding supplemental material. When we add supplemental material, it really brings history to life. This picture here shows the original Erie Canal. We have the towpath where the mules and horses actually work. We have one of the small original barge boats. Here we can actually see the canal being used for leisure activity, the train dropping off passengers all dressed in their best clothing. But we also need to know that this was not always viewed as a positive canal. And if we look at this poster here, vote no for the canal. This here actually shows that there were two sides to the issue. Here, down below, adding the final photo brings to life the original canal in this view and the new, larger, deeper, wider barge canal. And as you can see, the boat is a much larger piece. Now, change over time is very easy to see when we compare maps. These two maps here, we have one, a hand-drawn map, and a second one, much more professionally done. We could follow the Mohawk River, the Hudson River, and see tiny changes over time. If we take that one step further and compare the earlier map to a Google Earth today, we clearly see changes all around the lock area where we have expanded, filled in land, and added, updated our locks. Another different type of map is an aerial view. A photo can be used just like a regular map. These two are a great way of looking at change over time. Now, if we see in the original photo that was taken in the early 1900s, and this one is called a Fairchild aerial map or aerial view, we see the Alfred E. Smith building here, and we also can identify it in the Google Earth image today. Now, it's a slightly different angle, and you see the Capitol building here. The Capitol building can just barely be made out, the top of it, in this photo. But the unique piece is the change to the right of the buildings. If you look in the original photo, you see many, many homes. Actually, over 300 homes were demolished and taken down to build the Empire State Plaza. So very quickly, students have an understanding of change over time by using this aerial view. Let's now see how we can use maps to help us make a literature connection. Let literature move your students. I mean, literally, move your students. Incorporating maps with a great historical fiction book truly, truly brings history alive. This book here, George Washington's Socks, by Elvira Woodruff, is a story about a group of young men experiencing time travel during the American Revolution. Children reading this story totally connect with the characters. However, the author does a great job providing the historical background and the context of the American Revolution. The problem is, students are so into the characters that they lose track of what's happening during the American Revolution, specific military strategies and movements. Incorporating a map while reading the book will completely, fully encompass the historical time period for the kids. Let's take a look at this one map here, a map of the campaign of 1776. This map shows New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. Quickly, just by adding a few figures or three-dimensional objects, students can move these pieces on the map while reading the book and quickly identify strategies and how they are related to geographic landmarks, such as the Delaware River or coming into Trenton. It will completely transform your literature in the classroom. Google Earth Literature Connection is another resource for teachers. Here you will find a variety of books with Google Earth maps that accompany the storyline. Students are able to follow the progress of the historical fiction or just a novel, following points along the Google Earth maps. Let's take a look at a map of the Hudson River. This map will show us how military tactics were impacted by geographic landforms and structures. Here we have a map of the Hudson River. You can see it goes from Albany down to New York City. We are going to zone in this area here, the West Point area. Looking at the Hudson River, there are a few curves along the way, but if you look closely right in this area, we have a natural S bend. We have West Point on this side, and we have Constitution Island on the opposite side. Here's a photo of Constitution Island. During the American Revolution, a very large iron chain was stretched from West Point to Constitution Island. Here is an actual picture of a piece of the chain. This complete chain reached over 600 yards to cross the Hudson River. This chain was used in hopes of slowing British ships up the Hudson River. Just by using this one map, students have an idea, visual, on how geographic location impacts military strategy. Let's take a look at another map. This map is a Sanborn fire map. Sanborn maps were actually manufactured and printed from 1867 to 1970. They documented what buildings were made from for insurance purposes, but they are a treasure trove of historical information. Let's take a look at this one. This one is of downtown Albany, our state capital. As you quickly notice when looking at the map, we have scale identified on the bottom, 40 feet to 1 inch, and we have a compass rose demonstrating which way north is. Now, you can identify all the different streets that are labeled, but for students, this is fantastic. First of all, we can use this map to identify industry during the late 1800s. Here you notice livery, foundry, we have steamboat supplies, and we have salt warehouse. So just quickly, students have an idea of the different manufacturing companies, different industries that were located in downtown Albany in the late 1800s. Students can take that a step further. They can actually start to research different locations. Here we see Albany Agricultural Works. They could find and identify broadsides, advertisements, newspaper articles, all on the different businesses. Here we have a mansion house. We look right here. It is located on Hudson Street and Broadway. The mansion house was a very, very common hotel at that time. You can see it was located very closely to the People's Line office. So once people arrived in Albany, this was a common place to stay. When you look closely at the picture, you see a horse-drawn carriage, and on the carriage it states Broadway, which is right where the mansion house was located. Let's take a look at a second Sanborn map and see what other information we can find. Here we have another Sanborn fire insurance map. This one also of Albany, New York. We can identify State Street. The Capitol actually is located right at the top of this hill, and North Pearl. We can identify the compass rose pointing north also in this direction. We are going to zoom in on this corner and also the end of North Pearl. We are going to take a look at photos that will show change over time. This print shows North Pearl and State Street. We can identify the buildings right on the corner. Here, this print is somewhere in the early 1800s. We see the horses and carriages and all the people standing in their fancy clothing, perfect for that time period. In this photograph, we actually can identify the same corner. This also is State Street and North Pearl. Here, we could identify that it's the early 1900s. You see the electrical lines, you start to see the trolleys, the cobblestone roads, the clothing, perfect to the time period. A tremendous amount of information can be identified in that photograph. Our next one is of the same corner. However, this is taken from Google Earth today. We could identify large changes in the area, right down to cars and signs and large buildings. Students can do a wonderful comparison using these three photos and the Sanborn map. Looking at the opposite end of North Pearl, we can identify three additional prints and photos. Here we have a print showing Orange Street and North Pearl. We can actually identify the Dutch Reformed Church. In this photo, we see the Dutch Reformed Church once again, but here in the early 1900s. Once again, you could start to see the electrical lines. In our last photograph, we have Google Earth, the Dutch Reformed Church today. So in all three, we can follow this one church and the changing surrounding. I hope I have inspired you to go out into your local community, grab some historical maps, and bring them into your classroom.